Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Talented Reads. Today's video is going to be a video. What is today's video? Oh, all the books that I read in January. So in the month of January, I read a total of 14 books, which is actually quite surprising because I felt like I had a slump and didn't read much. Yeah, and I read a total of 5,664 pages, thanks to Stephen King and his massive books. And my average rating for the month was 3.7. So let's get into all the books. I am continuing the horror challenge that I started last year. Let me put up the graphic that I found from a horror blog on the internet. I will link that in the description box. I did not create this. But what I've been doing is picking a group of books to read associated with the specific subgenre of horror. I've completed the paranormal and like a big majority of the monster section. So I will be doing a dedicated horror wrap-up video next week for what I read in January. So let's just talk through those books really quick here. First was Creature by John Saul. This is about Blake Turner, who works for a really popular, really powerful high-tech company. The company asks him to relocate to a smaller town. So, of course, he picks up his whole family and they move to this town. But things in Silverdale are not quite as they seem. Next, I read Creature by Hunter Shea. This is about Kate, who deals with chronic pain, and she has an autoimmune disease, which has pretty much robbed her of a normal life. So, as a surprise, her husband Andrew books a stay for the whole summer in this kind of remote cottage lakeside up in Maine. But something lives in these woods and it doesn't want them to leave. And then I read 2 books with ants in them, which I'm silently kicking myself because I hate ants. The first was The Colony by A.J. Colucci. This is about a series of ant attacks in the city, New York City to be specific, that have left the mayor kind of desperate. So he turns to a couple of scientists who are Paul and Kendra for help. And so they kind of go into the city to observe behavior, and it kind of ends up being this race against time as the scientists search for the ant queen to help combat the problem before a nuke threatens to wipe out the whole city. And the 4th book that I read for the horror that I'll talk about next week is Invasive by Chuck Wendig. FBI agent Hannah is called out to a remote cabin to investigate the death of a man that was killed by a group of ants. These ants are then kind of tracked to this big company out on this isolated island. So Hannah goes out there to poke around and ask some questions. But Hannah soon finds herself stranded on the island with no way to escape, and the killer ants are coming. So, those were the 4 creaturey books that I read. We'll talk about those next week. So next is a group of Stephen King books that I read for a dedicated vlog. I bought a cookbook last year called Castle Rock Kitchen, which is like recipes from the world of Stephen King. So I ended up like reading the Stephen King book that is the recipe is based off of, and then I made the recipe. It was pretty fun, and it gave me a chance to really read down some of my Stephen King backlist. So that vlog is up, so check it out. And as I said, I did read 6 Stephen King books for that. So the first was Skeleton Crew, which is a short story collection. There's quite a few stories in here. It's not a bad collection. The Mist is actually what this, it was originally included in, which I have read. I read it as a standalone, and it still remains a favorite. Some other 5-star stories from this collection was Beach World, which is actually set on another planet, which I thought was kind of cool for Stephen King. I don't know that I read like spacey books. I mean, obviously he's written some like alien stuff, but nothing that was actually set on another planet. And it was pretty horrifying and creepy, so that was fun. Survivor Type, which I would say is kind of like Castaway on steroids. It's basically about this guy like getting stranded and kind of trying to survive, and he obviously descends into madness, and there's some pretty grotesque stuff that happens, which I hate but love. Morning Deliveries is a great small like serial killer story, and of course Grandma, which is the real reason I picked up this collection. Grandma was about a boy that was kind of left alone with his grandma who just wants a hug. Yeah, that one was really good. I liked that one. I gave that one 5 stars. So there were some other good 4 stars in here. Most collections, short story and anthologies end up being around 3 to 3.5 stars, because obviously you have some that you like and some that you don't. So, but yeah, I would still recommend this collection to people. When you think Stephen King, you don't think short stories. So I think this gives people kind of a taste of his writing, without obviously having to read like 1,000-page book. So next is Revival. We first follow Jamie, who meets the new town minister, Charles, and we kind of follow as this friendship begins between this little boy and a priest, until tragedy strikes, which forces Charles out of the town. And then we kind of follow Jamie throughout his entire life as he runs into Charles like at various points in his life. Jamie kind of begins to learn that Charles is on this path of revival, and there's some questions about the nature of his type of healing. I really enjoyed this. I know Stephen King has this habit of kind of doing a lot of these like coming of age stories, which sometimes those are hit or miss for me, but I think that type of setting is perfect for this novel, because I think, you really get how this priest has impacted, Jamie's life throughout his entire life. You really see how one person can make that much of a difference, and you really start to understand why Jamie made the decisions he made in the book. yeah, so like I said, I mean, we covered obviously a long time span, but the pace still felt decent. You did these little glimpses of Charles where, like, you feel like something's off, and other characters, like, feel like something's off, but nobody can just, like, you can put your finger on it. And I kind of like that unsettling feeling that kind of grows within the book. So with that said, I mean, when the ending came, like, I was ready for it. I just wanted to know. And it was a pretty explosive ending, which was fantastic. I would say if you like kind of Lovecraftian vibes, cosmic horror, Frankenstein, stuff like that, this would be a really good pick for you. Next is Salem's Lot. This is about Ben, who is a big-time writer who returns to Jerusalem's Lot, or Salem's Lot, as the locals call it, to kind of write a novel about the stuff that's haunted him for years that he has experienced as a child. However, he isn't the only new one to town. So this has been on my list to read for years. I mean, how can I pass up a vampire novel by the king himself? And I'm so happy that I loved this. I read Stephen King's introduction in this particular book that I have, and I love his kind of nod and homage that he pays to, like Bram Stoker in the original Dracula. And, reading this book, you can kind of see where he picked up ideas from that original book. But, of course, Stephen King has to take it to another level. Of all the Stephen King that I read this month, this was by far my favorite. And I said this before with other vampire stuff, but, like, this is how I love my vampires. This, like, they're vampires, right? And the characters are slowly kind of trying to come to terms with vampire. They have this, like, very foreboding, unsettling fear chapter on this town. And yeah, I mean, it was just very good. Of course, the vampire scenes were fantastic. Lots of blood. Can't go wrong. Next is Bag of Bones. This is about Mike, who returns to a cabin in the small town after his wife unexpectedly passes away. This cabin and cottage is something that him and his wife would always rent during the summer. So this is kind of his first time returning after his wife passed away. But Mike's return isn't welcome by everyone. And he meets this young girl, Kyra, and her mother. And he kind of turns into this protective father with the two of them. Kind of gets wrapped up in their story. And, of course, like all of Stephen King's small towns, there's secrets and stuff. So Mike starts to kind of uncover, like, what happened in this town and even secrets that his own wife was keeping from him. Yeah. So this is definitely a book showcasing power, control, and, like, collective guilt. Especially with small towns that have been able to keep these massive secrets. And they're keeping these massive secrets because there is one person in control and has the power to do so. Even after so many years, like, those secrets remain buried. I loved the supernatural elements. It was really creepy. And then you got this kind of thriller elements with the mystery of what happened with his wife and the mystery that he's uncovering of what happened in this town. Stephen King certainly had me guessing right up until the end. I will say that there's a pretty graphic rape scene and some harsh derogatory language, which is meant to be upsetting, which of course makes this a little hard to read. So if that's triggering, be warned. Next is The Dead Zone. This is about Johnny, who was in a severe car accident that left him in a coma for, I don't know, like 4 years. He finally wakes and has this like a miraculous healing. But not long after his waking, he kind of determines that he can see people's past and their futures when he touches them. So, of course, we end up kind of following him through kind of the rest of his life, as he determines that his gift is actually a curse. This was just an okay read for me. I was expecting something a little darker, and that's probably because I was expecting that reading, a Stephen King book. But I felt like this was more of kind of a light psychic thriller. I did think that Johnny's character was the perfect character to wield this kind of type of psychic power. And you can really start to feel for him. You really get a sense of how his gift and his ability is a curse for him. It's not a gift. It's something he has grown to hate. And of course, you really see how other people take advantage of him and his situation. And, they start to think that they know what's best for you because it's, them and their personal gain, which I guess is kind of the whole scary part of everything. I will say the real downer for me was the last part of the book. There is like one scene at the very end that was super intense and not at all how I was expecting the book to end, so that was kind of surprising. But I would say like the last quarter of the book, it kind of just like fizzled out. You follow him and you're kind of like, okay, like where's this going? Like what's the end game, right? So I don't know, it kind of, instead of the build up that I was expecting, it kind of dragged on, and then all of a sudden there was this kind of big end. I don't know, maybe I'm being too picky. And last Stephen King book is Hearts in Atlantis. The synopsis says it's 5 interconnected sequential narratives. Though when I was reading it, to me, it just feels more like a big chapter book with like different point of views. This whole thing's basically set in the 60s, and it's pretty rooted in like war times. There's a lot of political themes, going on. Of course, 60s with the hippie stuff. That's obviously one big point in here. Out of all of the Stephen King books that I read this month, this was my least favorite, though it was still just an okay book. This was my last one that I read, and it was like at this point, it felt like just another stupid coming of age story of a young boy. Like, come on, it's been told before. There was a big war theme, which is not necessarily a subject I enjoy reading. This is ultimately kind of about Bobby and the friendship that he develops with an older man who is his neighbor, Ted. And most of the stories are kind of tied to characters and some instances that happened with Bobby and Ted. So even though they're from different perspectives, like their names get brought up, or there's some like reoccurring themes that you notice throughout everybody's stories. which is kind of interesting. But I think I would have liked just like one story that more focused on the continuing storyline from the first book with Ted and Bobby, because there was some stuff that happened that I'm like, I need answers, you know? I need stuff to like wrap up. Anyways, it just felt like I was getting a story, was focusing on that, and then, you know, the next one would start and it would like shift away and then shift back. I don't know. It just felt kind of unnecessary. Like, let's just go with the flow, you know? So, yeah, that's all the Stephen King that I read. I had 3 ARCs, which stands for Advanced Reader Copies. I read these on my Kindle. These are ebooks through NetGalley. The first is The Things We Do to Our Friends by Heather Darwent. This is about Claire and her evolving friendship with Tabitha. Claire, like, ends up becoming obsessed with Tabitha and is kind of drawn into Tabitha's world and her circle of friends. And then we get to a point where Tabitha, like, unveils a business idea that Claire doesn't really want to be a part of, but ends up getting roped into it because she wants to follow Tabitha, and, like, some shit goes down. So there were a lot of things I liked about this book and a lot of things that I didn't like. So I struggled with the rating of this one a little bit. I think, so a few of the things that I did enjoy was the academic setting. I don't know that I would necessarily call this a dark academia because a lot of the scenes weren't necessarily set at the school. It just happened to be where everybody like met each other. And I did like the friendship group. I don't know that I liked every single person within that friendship group. But I thought everyone was different, and you could see how they would easily kind of all be attracted to each other. You know, each character had a part to play, and they played it well, which I thought was very well done. Now, this is not like a happy friendship book. This is a pretty toxic friendship group. And it's not just between, like, our main character, Claire, in the group. Like, the main leader, Tabitha, is just freaking rude to them all, and they kind of treat it like a shrug of the shoulders, like, oh, that's just how Tabitha is. Which I didn't appreciate. Like, somebody needs to call her out on her shit. But I think you kind of get to the point where, like, yeah, that's just how those characters respond to situations. Yeah. I did appreciate a few of the plot twists, and I probably could have seen them coming if I'd been paying more attention and truly trying to, like, guess what the plot point would be. But these characters are very, like, go with the flow characters, so, you know, I was going with the flow. This book does have some dark parts, though it's not as dark as I was thinking, and definitely not as dark as I was hoping for. The prologue is by far the best part of the book, and it really did a good job at, like, roping you in. And though it kind of, like, came back around, it was, like, a little, like, too late, in my opinion. You know, like, at that point, I'd kind of forgotten about it, and it just didn't make as much of an impact I think it would have made if it was come back around earlier in the story. I thought the pacing was a little strange. You know, we get peaks of, like, intense scenes, and then it would cut to, like a different time period, and then it would slow down. I don't know, like I was expecting more of like this slow burn to high intensity rather than this like choppiness that we got. Now, with all that, I will say, like, when the parts were good, like, they were good, you know? There just wasn't enough of that feeling to give it a more solid rating. But this is a debut, and I would still consider this, like, a pretty solid debut. Yeah. So thank you to NetGalley and Ballantine or Bantam Books for the art. And this book was released on January 10th. Next is The Drift by C.J. Tudor. Okay, so I'm going to read the synopsis because it was kind of vague and I don't want to give too much away. So what I read, which is like all I read, that I was like, yeah, I'm down for this. Plus it was C.J. Tudor, you know. It says, 3 ordinary people risk everything for a chance at redemption in this audacious, utterly gripping novel of catastrophe and survival at the end of the world. Whoa. This won't go down as my favorite C.J. Tudor, but it's still a pretty good thriller. One thing that I love about C.J.'s books is the ability to build up suspense with this fast-moving plot, and this one is certainly no different. You know, they talked about 3 ordinary people. So, you know, we get 3 different perspectives, but those people aren't necessarily, like, together. So you have these kind of 3 different groups of people in this one snowy area. And, like, they're cut off from each other. They're cut off from any sort of contact. And they're just, like, all trying to survive. So there's quite a lot of characters, you know, amongst the 3 groups, and it takes a minute to, like, get your bearings. But CJ made the circumstances and the context and the characters different enough that I don't think it took me long to get the hang of everything. There is a kind of virus plot that's like a backstory, which I thought was kind of surprising. I was expecting a more, like, traditional locked room mystery, but then we got some, like, apocalyptic themes, like, thrown in there. Some of the side plots of the groups were uninteresting to me, but I do understand, like, their importance to the overall story. So, and I will say the end was nothing that I saw coming. So there's that. Yeah, thank you to NetGalley and Balancing Books for the art. And this was released January 31st. And the last arc that I read was The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This is about Alex, who receives an invite to a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, which is a month-long writing retreat at the estate of her favorite horror author, Rosa Vallow. But once she arrives, like, things aren't quite as they seem. So, I freaking loved this book. Like, the stakes were high, and they just kept getting higher throughout the book, which made for such a super intense atmosphere. And then you get that on top of just the isolation of the house. And it just made me feel like I was there as part of a character. I felt the pressure of all the group. I felt the pain. I felt everything that they were going through. Julia threw me for a loop with some really good plot twists. And I was so invested in the story, and the pace kept things interesting that I wasn't even really thinking about, like, possible plot twists. So, I mean, that's always exciting. Now, this is not a full 5-star. I took away like a half star just because I'm a picky bitch. And that's really for the ending. Now, not like the last chapter of the book, because that was amazing, but like the last quarter of the book. I think it got a little messy, a little unnecessary, and maybe even a little unbelievable at one point. But like this whole thing was crazy, so I was just rolling with the punches. Yeah, I would recommend this like for anyone who likes books about books with a slight competitive edge. And maybe even like a locked room mystery. Like this kind of has a little bit of everything. And I will say that I was reading the acknowledgments in the back of her book, and she thanks Andy Bartz, who I believe is the author Andrea Bartz, who's another thriller. So I think they're related, which is really exciting because I really like all of Andrea's books too. So, you know, this was a debut from Julia, and it was a pretty freaking fantastic debut. So I'm really excited to see what she comes out with next. Thank you to NetGalley and Atria Books for the art. This book will be released February 21st. Although I have read it, I want a copy for my bookshelf, so I've pre-ordered my copy. Have you? You better get to it. All right. Now, I've really been dreading putting out my January wrap-up, all because of this book. And that is the last book I have on my list, which is, I don't even know how to say it, The Doloroid by Missouri Williams. Oh, geez. I don't even know where to begin with this book. Like, from what, okay, so I saw this book on a TikTok video. And like, I didn't even read the synopsis. I don't even know what it was about, other than it was on this girl's list of like books that made her go, what the fuck did I just read? And so I was like, yes, purchase. I don't even need to know anything about it. And so I picked it up and I read it. And yes, I would agree with the what the fuck did I just read? But it was a little more than that. Like, from what I can gather, like, reading between the lines, is that the world ended, and this woman and her brother decided to have kids to remake a world as they saw fit. But then, like, the kids grew up, they think their mom's, like, this wackadoodle, and they, I don't know, start to have sex with each other to, like, make their own legacies. I don't know. The story opened up with one sibling, Dolores, which I don't know if that's supposed to be Delroy from the cover. I don't know. And she's being, like, wheelbarrowed away from the camp. And she's, like, not supposed to return, but then she does. And everybody's like, wow, you're here. And I think her return is, like, supposed to mark something, but who the frick knows what that is? Like, here's the thing. I feel like I have to give a star to the author because the writing really is kind of beautiful. And, like, I don't even know how you would write this. In fact, that's a little too fancy for me, and I really felt dumb reading it. Yeah, that's, like, the bottom line. I don't know, maybe I'm just, like, not a literary person. Like, just, like, give it to me straight, you know? Don't BS me. Just tell me like it is. there were some things going on that I was just supposed to like go along with, but you know, I can't. I need a backstory. I need to know why. Like, why do some of them have no legs? Why is the headmaster building a fort with moths out of soggy bed sheets? I don't know. Why is the book called Doloid? Why are the kids so mean to this one person? Why am I still reading this book? Nope. Not for me. It's been a long time since I gave a book 2-star. But I was pretty disappointed. And I thought about, like, maybe rereading it, but then I was like, why would I torture myself? So, anyways, that's all I have for this video. You know, it feels like a pretty good start to the year. And although I kind of ended this on a sour note, I am feeling encouraged for, like, the rest of the year. So drop a comment below. Let me know how your January reading went. Do you have any new favorites? Did you have any disappointments? I'm curious. I will probably want to read your disappointments just, you know, to experience something sad. I don't know. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.